everybody. Welcome back to A People's Historian, the show where we read about half an hour of history together. My name is Jason Kishinev, and we are reading State of War, A Secret History of the CIA and the Bush Administration. This episode, we're going to start Chapter 8, In Denial, which is where most of America is about a lot of things. Remember, if you like the episode, if you like the show, hit that like and subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you're notified when I make future videos, because YouTube has been known to unsubscribe people from shows like this one that tell people the truth, that tell people things the establishment doesn't want you to hear. Let's dig in. Chapter 8. In Denial, Oil, Terrorism, and Saudi Arabia. The FBI has an evocative phrase that it uses to describe the personal effects seized from a suspect during an arrest. Pocket litter. If a criminal or a terrorist is carrying something on him at the time of his capture, pocket litter, chances are it has some significance. A wallet, driver's license, passport, airline tickets, personal notes, photographs, computer disks all contain important clues to the suspect's past activities and future plans. The pocket litter found on Abu Zubaydah when he was captured in Pakistan in March 2002 was particularly revealing. Perhaps too revealing. Zubaydah, the first high-ranking Al-Qaeda leader to be captured after the September 11th attacks, was carrying two bank cards similar to American debit or ATM cards, one from a bank in Kuwait and another from one in Saudi Arabia. The discovery of the bank cards revealed that Abu Zubaydah, a top lieutenant of Osama bin Laden, had access to Western-style accounts in major financial institutions in the Persian Gulf and almost certainly had the accounts at the time of 9/11. This was an extremely rare find. An American source involved in Zubaydah's capture said he believes Zubaydah is the only top Al-Qaeda leader ever captured with such clear physical evidence that he was using Western-style bank accounts. Top Al-Qaeda leaders have instead tended to fund their activities through the use of informal Muslim financial institutions known as hawalas, which have extremely loose record keeping and don't leave behind the kind of paper trail that come with banks and other Western financial institutions. The discovery of Abu Zubaydah's cards provided some of the most tantalizing physical evidence ever uncovered related to Al-Qaeda. The cards had the potential to help investigators understand the financial structure behind Al-Qaeda and perhaps even the 9/11 plot itself. Bum bum bum. The cards were rare finds in the fields of terrorist financing investigations, one that almost never yields clear and conclusive evidence. Tracking the murky money trail left behind by terrorists has been a frustrating and often fruitless exercise for the forensic financial sleuths at the FBI, CIA, and Treasury Department. Investigators usually have to rely on arcane link analysis and other circumstantial and indirect evidence to try to draw connections from among the many rivers of money coursing through Islamic charities and other non-governmental organizations that might lead them to terrorist leaders and their plots. As a result, American experts have often gone down the wrong path as they have tried to follow terrorist money. The CIA and FBI believed for years, for instance, that bin Laden, the son of Saudi Arabia's richest construction magnate, was funding Al-Qaeda's activities with his own personal wealth. They didn't understand the significance of the donations Al-Qaeda was receiving from other wealthy Arabs, particularly from Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states who shared bin Laden's Islamic extremism. It took years for the U.S. government to develop a more nuanced understanding of Al-Qaeda and its money. Eventually, the CIA realized that bin Laden was not as wealthy as originally believed. He was a member of an enormous extended family. He was one of 57 children of Mohammed bin Laden. 57 children. And so Osama received a relatively small inheritance from his father's huge Saudi construction empire. In 2000, the United States determined that instead of the $300 million he was thought to be worth, bin Laden had received only about $1 million a year from his family from 1970 until 1994. Oh, he only got $24 million in 24 years? That's not wealthy enough? In the early 1990s, under pressure from the Saudi government, the bin Laden family had been forced to sell Osama bin Laden's share of the family construction empire, and the Saudi government later froze the proceeds of the sale. Bin Laden was simply not rich enough to fund a jihad by himself. Maybe. The CIA estimated that it took about $30 million a year to run Al-Qaeda's operations before 9/11, and that virtually all of the money was coming from donations, often funneled through Islamic charities and corporate fronts. Yet while American investigations developed strong suspicions about specific Islamic charities and their donors, it was always difficult for the CIA and FBI to prove which ones actually were in league with Al-Qaeda. With the bank cards discovered with Abu Zubaydah, there was little need for link analysis or circumstantial guesswork. Although the cards were not in Zubaydah's name, they were clearly being used by one of Osama bin Laden's top lieutenants. An examination of the transactions in the accounts might help track the movements of the Al-Qaeda leadership in the crucial days before and after 9/11, while also providing a conclusive trail back to their financial backers in the Middle East. The cards had the potential to be keys that could unlock some of Al-Qaeda's darkest secrets. The cards could give us entree right into who was funding Al-Qaeda. No link analysis needed, said one American source. You could track money right from the financiers to a top Al-Qaeda figure. But something very odd happened when the FBI and CIA team on the ground in Pakistan swept up Abu Zubaydah's personal belongings and bundled them back to the United States for examination. There is little evidence that an aggressive investigation of the cards was ever conducted. Two American sources familiar with the matter say that they don't believe the government's experts on terrorism financing have ever thoroughly probed the transactions in Abu Zubaydah's accounts or vigorously pursued the origins of the funds. It is not clear whether an investigation of the cards simply fell through the cracks or whether they were ignored because no one wanted to know the answers about connections between Al Qaeda and important figures in the Middle East, particularly in Saudi Arabia. The two American sources who have followed this remarkable story are willing to give Washington the benefit of the doubt and believe the failure to pursue the leads was a simple oversight rather than a political cover-up to protect the Saudis. The cards were sent back to Washington and were never fully exploited, said one American familiar with the matter. I think nobody ever looked at them because of incompetence. There is no evidence that Abu Zubaydah has ever been questioned about the cards. Despite the lack of interest or attention in Washington, some American investigators continued to pursue the case as best they could on their own. But they found it difficult to get information about where the cards had been used or any other information about them, especially from Saudi officials. Eventually, American investigators in the field recruited a source whom they believed could help solve the mystery, a Muslim financier with a questionable past and with connections to the Afghan Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Saudi intelligence. Agreed to work with the Americans to try to find out what he could. In 2004, he reported that his Saudi sources had told him a stunning story. 18 months earlier, he said he had been told Saudi intelligence officials had seized all of the records related to the card from the Saudi financial institution in question. The records then disappeared. There was no longer any way to trace the money that had gone into the account. The timing of the reported seizure of the records by Saudi intelligence closely coincided with the timing of Abu Zubaydah's capture in Pakistan in March 2002. Ever since the September 11th attacks, the trail back from Al-Qaeda to Saudi Arabia has been an intriguing path, but one that very few American investigators have been willing or able to follow. America's energy dependence on Saudi Arabia and the money and power that flows from Saudi oil means that Saudi influence in American politics is pervasive. It is an issue only slightly less sensitive to discuss in polite company in Washington than that of Israeli political influence. And we all know how that goes. So many people in Washington's power circles, lawyers and lobbyists, defense contractors, former members of Congress and former White House aides, diplomats and intelligence officers, and even some journalists rely so heavily on Saudi money or Saudi access that ugly truths about Saudi links to Islamic extremism have been routinely ignored or suppressed. In addition, Saudi Arabia's support for the war in Iraq, coupled with its intermittent efforts to try to stabilize oil prices, has been highly valuable to the Bush administration. The Saudi investment in political power in Washington paid off in the days and weeks after the September 11th attacks. During that frantic time when the Bush administration's counterterrorism policies were still being formulated, and American public opinion about 9/11 and the roots of terror were still highly malleable, no one in Washington worked harder to earn their keep than the spin merchants of Saudi Arabia. They were faced with the public relations nightmare of historic proportions. 15 of the 19 hijackers who had just killed thousands of Americans were from Saudi Arabia. I'm going to say that one again. 15 of the 19 hijackers who had just killed thousands of Americans were from Saudi Arabia. They had been sent on their suicide mission by the son of one of Saudi Arabia's wealthiest and most powerful families. What was worse, the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon were winning praise from Islamic clerics and other radicals back home in Saudi Arabia, where Osama bin Laden had become a folk hero. But despite those awkward PR issues, the Saudis successfully managed the crisis and ultimately convinced most Americans that there was an important distinction between the actions of Saudi extremists and the policies of the Saudi government and royal family. Later, when it was revealed that members of the bin Laden family and other prominent Saudi citizens were allowed to leave the United States on special flights arranged by the Saudi government and facilitated by the FBI in the immediate aftermath of the September 11th attacks, the controversy was again sorry, that word was muted. Yes, I think I was cute. The independent 9/11 Commission downplayed the incident, concluding in its final report that it had found no evidence of political intervention in the United States government to approve the flights, and that the FBI had conducted a satisfactory screening of Saudi nationals who left the United States on charter flights, end quote, after 9/11. Yet FBI documents released in 2005 contradicted the 9/11 Commission report and revealed that the FBI had not been certain whether some Saudis who left the country on the special flights had had information relevant to the 9/11 investigation. Certainly, the power and influence over American foreign policy held by Saudi Arabia can be overstated. Critics often fall prey to dark conspiracy theories. It is easy to exaggerate the degree of Saudi complicity in the rise of Al-Qaeda or the 9/11 plot. The truth is less sinister, but no less dangerous. Like the leaders of other Arab states, officials in Saudi Arabia turned a blind eye to Islamic terrorism for decades, hoping that they could buy off the terrorists, and appease the religious extremists who backed them while still maintaining the status quo in the region. Turning a blind eye to terrorism is very different from acting as a state sponsor of it. And since May 2003, when Al-Qaeda first launched a wave of terrorist attacks inside Saudi Arabia, the Saudi security services have become far more cooperative with the CIA and FBI in cracking down on Al-Qaeda networks operating on Saudi soil. After the Riyadh bombings in that month, CIA Director George Tenet traveled to Saudi Arabia to meet with top Saudi officials and found that the attitude about Al-Qaeda had completely changed. The Saudis finally recognized that Al-Qaeda was their enemy too. Yet it is still true that both before and after 9/11, President Bush and his administration have displayed a remarkable lack of interest in aggressively examining the connections between Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and the Saudi power elite. Even as the Bush administration spent enormous time and energy trying in vain to prove connections between Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden in order to help justify the war in Iraq, the administration was ignoring the far more conclusive ties with Saudi Arabia. Those links are much stronger and far more troubling than has ever been previously disclosed, and until they are thoroughly investigated, the roots of Al Qaeda's power and the full story of 9/11 will never be known. The connections between the Saudi government, particularly in intelligence service, and Osama bin Laden date back to the 1980s, when when bin Laden, the 17th son of Saudi Arabia's richest and most successful construction magnate, first emerged as a young and enthusiastic sponsor of the Afghan resistance to the Soviet occupation, as well as of the Arab fighters pouring into Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. At the time, bin Laden, Saudi intelligence, and even the CIA had a common enemy in the Soviet Union. And Saudi intelligence took special interest in the Arab foreign fighters joining in from across the Middle East. Prince Turki al-Faisal, now the Saudi ambassador to the United States, is a member of the Saudi royal family who served for roughly 2 decades as the chief of Saudi intelligence, handling the Afghan account for Saudi Arabia. In the early and mid-1980s, Prince Turki and his lieutenants had direct contact with bin Laden. It is still unclear whether bin Laden was actually an agent of Saudi intelligence during that period, but author Steve Call in Ghost Wars reported that bin Laden did have at least a substantial relationship with Saudi intelligence during the Soviet war in Afghanistan. Interesting. What now seems clear is that Saudi intelligence found it difficult to turn against bin Laden in the 1990s as he evolved from an eccentric supporter of anti-communist freedom fighters into an anti-American terrorist. Many Saudi intelligence officers sympathized with his religious fundamentalism and his intense hatred for the growing Western cultural influence over the Saudi kingdom. Even after bin Laden was exiled first to the Sudan and then to Afghanistan, Saudi intelligence officials didn't see him as a major threat to their interests until it was far too late. By the late 1990s, as Al-Qaeda went on a terrorist rampage, the Saudis maintained an excruciatingly complicated relationship with bin Laden, one that no American official could ever fully understand. There have been numerous signs, both large and small, that for many years the sympathies of at least some officials in the Saudi security apparatus lay with Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and not with the United States. When, for example, the CIA first created its Osama bin Laden station in 1996 to begin to track and disrupt the Saudi exiles' activities, the agency asked the Saudis to provide copies of Osama bin Laden's birth certificate, passport, bank records, and other key records before the CIA could fully understand bin Laden's intentions. Agency officials believed they had to have better information about his background, but the Saudis refused to turn over any of the documents, according to a CIA source. By the time of the 9/11 attacks, the CIA still had not received a copy of bin Laden's birth certificate from the government of Saudi Arabia, the source said. In 1997, Saudi Arabia detained Syed Tayyib al-Madani, who had been a key financial aid to Osama bin Laden while bin Laden had been living in the Sudan. The CIA repeatedly asked the Saudis for access to al-Madani because he knew virtually everything there was to know about Al-Qaeda's finances. It was said that within Al-Qaeda, al-Madani had to approve every expenditure of more than $1,000. But the Saudis repeatedly refused, and the CIA didn't gain access to him until after the September 11th attacks, according to a CIA source. Before 9/11, the Saudis gave us almost nothing on Al-Qaeda, said one CIA source. In fact, in 1997, the CIA's Bin Laden station issued a memorandum for CIA Director George Tenet, who was about to travel to Saudi Arabia, that identified the Saudi intelligence service as a hostile service. That's interesting, on the issue of Al-Qaeda. Describing a foreign intelligence service as a hostile means at the very least that they cannot be trusted. CIA sources also say that the agency has had strong evidence that some of the intelligence it has shared with Saudi security officials has ended up in the hands of Al-Qaeda operatives. For example, the CIA has in the past given the Saudis copies of NSA communication intercepts, which included conversations among suspected Al-Qaeda operatives in Saudi Arabia. But after the CIA gave the intercepts to the Saudis, the suspects quickly stopped using the communications that the Americans had been monitoring, making it far more difficult to track the terrorists. I wonder how that happened. Documents and computer files seized from Al-Qaeda operatives after 9/11 also revealed to the CIA that Al-Qaeda had the run of Saudi Arabia, as a CIA source familiar with the intelligence put it. That remained true, the source said, at least until May 2003, when the Saudis finally began to crack down. Top Jordanian officials have also recounted a story to their American counterparts about Saudi sympathies to bin Laden that chilled the Americans who heard it. Because the Jordanian intelligence service, which is closely tied to the CIA, is renowned in the Middle East for its effectiveness, top Saudi officials asked it to review the Saudi intelligence apparatus and provide them with an assessment. When they began touring Saudi military and security facilities to conduct their review, however, the Jordanians saw something that helped explain why the Saudis had not done a better job in counterterrorism. A number of Saudi officials had Osama bin Laden's screensavers on their office computers. Holy crap! According to an American source who heard the story from a top Jordanian official. Oh my goodness! Wow. That's what I think of that. Mind-blowing. According to a former senior CIA official, the Saudi connection came into play in the spring of 1998, a time when America, had perhaps its best chance to capture or kill Osama bin Laden before 9/11. Now, why would we have killed him in 1998? In early 1998, Osama bin Laden was still a relatively easy target. He did not yet seem to realize that he was under intense surveillance by the CIA, and so he stuck to a predictable schedule and lived a relatively stable existence. He spent most of his time in a rough compound called Tarnak Farms on the outskirts of Kandahar, Afghanistan, and regularly drove in a small convoy into Kandahar to meet with his Taliban hosts, including leader Mullah Omar. He talked on a satellite telephone and did not yet know that the NSA was eavesdropping on all his conversations. True, he was living in one of the most remote regions of the world, protected by armed bodyguards, and he enjoyed the full support of the Taliban government, but getting to bin Laden did not seem like an impossible task. The CIA's bin Laden unit concluded that the Saudi exile could be taken, and came up with a plan under which local Pashtun tribesmen working for the agency would capture him and hide him in a cave until the Americans came to claim him. A special CIA team would then fly into Afghanistan, retrieve bin Laden from the Afghans, and bring him back to face justice. Now, I asked kind of hypothetically why we would kill him in 1998 because it was, 3 years before 2001, but he was also attached to the 1993 bombing in the parking garage under the World Trade Center that didn't do a whole lot. So we, obviously we were aware of his activities, but I wanted to explain that it's kind of a half joke, and I'm not a total idiot. I understand. So let's wrap up the episode there. Yeah! Thanks for joining me. Hope you tune in to the next episode, and do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. See you next time.